Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second webinar in our LeafMark Standard version 17 consultation webinar series. As we said at the beginning, this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel so that this can be accessed after this webinar if there are other stakeholders who wish to view the webinar, or if you have colleagues that weren't able to join at this time, they will be able to access the webinar at a later time through our YouTube channel. So today we will be focusing on reviewing the changes to the business planning and resilience section of the LeafMark standard, as well as proposed changes to the engaging society section of the standard. In our first webinar, we provided an overview of the consultation process as well as the key changes to the LeafMark standard. And at each subsequent webinar, we'll be discussing key changes in the individual sections of the standard. So as we get started, I just want to introduce myself briefly. My name is Abby Holman. I am the Standards and Impacts Manager within the LeafMark team at Leaf. So that means I look after the development of the LeafMark standard and any producer-facing support and guidance to meet the standard requirements. I also look after our impacts workstream, developing the intended outcomes and indicators to monitor the impacts of LeafMark. I'm also joined today on tech support by my colleague Alex, who will be able to help monitor the chat and things like that. Another quick housekeeping item. There will be a question and answer session at the end of this slide deck presentation. So if you please would put any questions in the Q&A box, that would be great, and we will get to those questions after the presentation. If you have any other technical difficulties or things like that, you can put that in the chat box, but for all questions, if you would please put them in the Q&A box, that would be great so that we don't lose track of your questions. An agenda about what we'll cover today. So first we'll discuss a bit of context around how the consultation is working and how we've developed the LeafMark standard thus far. Then we'll discuss an overview of the key changes to note in version 17. And then we'll go into the detail about the key changes to the business planning and resilience section and the engaging society section. And then at the end, we will have plenty of time for a question and answer session. So to provide some context for this consultation and the development of this new version of the LeafMark standard, LeafMark, for those who are interacting with Leaf for the first time or new to LeafMark and the LeafMark standard, LeafMark is a global environmental assurance system that recognizes more sustainably farmed products. And the LeafMark standard is based on Leaf's integrated farm management principles. There are 9 principles that cover different areas of a farming business, and integrated farm management recognizes that nothing in farming acts in isolation. So how you're managing one area of your business will likely have an impact on another area. For example, how you're managing your soils might have an impact on water and vice versa. So the LeafMark standard is reviewed every 3 to 5 years approximately to ensure it's remains up to date and evolves with the needs of the farming industry and also producers, and supporting producers on that sustainability journey, building resilience within their business and having a better impact on the environment. The version of the standard that is currently effective, that is currently being audited, is version 16.1 of the standard. And version 16 was published a couple of years ago. Version 16.1 was an update to the standard that was made in September of 2023, I believe. And we're now currently developing version 17 of the standard. So we've gone on a review and revision cycle to develop this draft. We held a number of review sessions to review version 16.1. We then developed working groups, subject matter experts, and multi-stakeholder groups within these working groups to inform the development of each section of the LEAF Marque standard. This was also overseen by our technical advisory committee, who oversee the development of the technical content in the standard. So this is our first consultation on version 17. And our aim is to get as much stakeholder feedback as possible and reach a wide variety of stakeholders and also number of stakeholders. So that's not only our members and producers, but also academics, fellow NGOs, government, industry, members of the public, and also supply chain stakeholders. There are a number of ways to get involved in this consultation. One of the ways being attending these webinars. It's a great opportunity to understand the key changes being proposed within the version 17 draft, and also an opportunity to ask questions. There's also opportunities to provide feedback to us on the standard via some online surveys we've developed. We have a survey that is slightly longer, and then also a shorter survey available for those who maybe have a little bit less time to spend on providing feedback. Those surveys are available in multiple languages, so English, French, Spanish, and Italian. We also have on our public consultation website a summary of changes document that summarizes those key changes to be aware of within version 17. And we do recommend, though, that you have a look at the version 17 draft, because there's been quite a lot of minor changes or some wording changes as well that we haven't covered in these key documents or this webinar. In the summary of changes document and those webinars, we'll be covering those key major changes. We also welcome feedback via email or phone call or letter, just to make the feedback process and the consultation as accessible as possible. Unfortunately, we weren't able to translate the version 17 draft into multiple languages for this consultation due to some resource limitations, but we do have surveys and summary of changes documents that are translated, as I mentioned. One last thing to note is that the livestock management section of the LEAF Marque standard, which was previously called animal husbandry, is still under development, still under revision. And so that is not included in this first round of consultation, but it will be included in our second round of public consultation in July, which I will talk about at the end of these slides. So once we've gotten feedback during the different consultation activities, we'll be reviewing all comments and suggestions, and we'll be taking action based on that feedback, whether that means responding and discussing those questions in more depth with stakeholders that brought to our attention, or incorporating revisions into the standard based on the feedback we received. I believe also we'll be putting a link in the chat to our public consultation webpage. If you haven't had an opportunity to have a look at that page, we encourage you to have a look and do that in your time. So we'll move on now to talk about just a brief overview of some key changes to be aware of in version 17. We covered this in a little bit of detail in the introduction webinar, but for those who weren't able to make that webinar, we'll give a little bit of an overview now. So there have been quite a few structural and language-focused changes within version 17, including a lot of structural changes to improve the navigation and the layout of the standard. So dividing the different sections into subsections so that control points and requirements are categorized based on their topic, and that makes it a little bit easier, hopefully, to navigate the different requirements. We've also formatted the control points a bit differently, in a way that hopefully makes the requirements easier to read and understand what's required in the control point. We're also adding a guidance column to the standard so that a business can look immediately to check for exactly what they need to do, check for examples or links, things like that, to help them implement the requirements of the control point. Just a note that if you are having a look at the version 17 draft, this guidance column is not yet complete, so that guidance is still in development. We also are going to be making an Excel format of the standard available for the first time, so we do have a draft of that Excel format standard available for you to view during this consultation period on the website. We're also exploring what different formats or features we might be able to incorporate into the standard or make available for those who have different either learning or reading needs. We've also made a number of language modifications to try to improve the international applicability of our requirements and different examples we provide in the standard, as well as using a lot more simplified language in the standard requirements to make it more easy to understand and ensure that the requirements are clear. We also will have a new translation of the standard available, which we're actually working on right now to make available for version 16.1, but we will have it available for version 17 as well. We'll be doing a new translation in Portuguese. We do welcome other suggestions for additional translations. If you or stakeholders you work with would really benefit from having the standard translated, please do let us know. Get in touch if there are additional languages that might be helpful. Another key change to be aware of that we covered in greater detail in our first webinar is the shift to different control point categories and a tiering approach to the LeafMark standard. In version 16.1 and all historical versions of the LeafMark standard, control points have been categorized as either essential or recommended for certification. Those essential control points are within version 16.1 mandatory. They are required for certification, but those recommended control points are not required for certification. They are simply a continuous improvement mechanism and a way to demonstrate continuous improvement going above and beyond the essential requirements. In version 17, we're proposing a shift to core and advanced requirements. So core requirements are requirements that must be complied with for certification. They are mandatory. Advanced control points are optional for certification. And we're proposing there are two different types of advanced control points. The first being advanced 1 control points. These are more rigorous or potentially more difficult to implement than core control points, and advanced 2 control points are more rigorous than advanced 1 control points. There also will be a not applicable option within a number of different control points in the standard, so that will remain the same between version 16.1 and version 17, as we understand that not all control points in the standard will be applicable to all business types or all sectors. So corresponding to these control point category changes is the introduction of a LeafMark tiering approach. So there will be 2 LeafMark tiers, a core tier and an advanced tier. And these tiers correspond to these new control point categories. The purpose of this is really to demonstrate where LeafMark producers are in their integrated farm management journey and sustainability journey, and to recognize that producers are at different stages in that journey. So by having core and advanced criteria and tiers, producers will be able to demonstrate where they are in their journey, either within different sections of the standard or across the standard as a whole. If we look at this table here, this summarizes how the control point categories correspond to the different tiers and also certification requirements. So the core control points in the standard are required for certification. They are also required for the core tier of LeafMark. They are also required for the advanced tier of LeafMark. Advanced 1 control points are not required for LeafMark certification. They are not required for the core tier, but they are required for the advanced tier. Advanced 2 control points are not required for certification. They are not required for the core tier, and they are optional for the advanced tier. If you would like more information about this tiering approach, we do encourage you to have a look at our previous introduction webinar that has a bit more information about this. But I'm also happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session. So if we move on now to discuss what the key changes are to the business planning and resilience section of version 17 are, the first change to highlight is the section title change. So currently, the title of this section in version 16.1 is Organization and Planning, and we're proposing this title changes to Business Planning and Resilience in version 17. And the reason for this is to better align with what really the core purpose of this section is, to support with planning, so thinking about what are the overarching sustainability aims of the business and how do they align with the commercial aims of the business, and also to pull in that resilience element. So businesses are, as we know, facing a lot of increasing pressures, whether those be economic and financial due to inflation and rising costs, all the way to experiencing and navigating extreme weather events. And with the impacts of these different pressures having a potentially huge effect on the bottom line of the business. So it's important that we're supporting businesses and planning for and understanding the potential impacts and adopting strategies to mitigate against these where possible. The section title change also recognizes the importance of continuous improvement through planning and identifying how to reduce risks to the business in order to become more resilient in facing different shocks and challenges that they might encounter. So now we're just going to discuss some new control points that we're proposing are added to this section. And then we'll also discuss a control point or two that have had some significant changes for you to be aware of. So we'll start with this control point, 1.3. This is a new control point that's been proposed for this section. This control point focuses on compliance with applicable national and local legal requirements that are relevant to the scope and focus of the LEAF Marque standard. And this control point aims to address how local and national legislation can provide context-specific rules and guidance that are important for businesses to follow to address different sustainability issues in their locality. And while the LEAF Marque standard is a global standard, local and national rules may provide those important guidelines for businesses to follow, for example, in terms of protecting certain species or natural resources like water bodies and watercourses, but also to prevent management practices that might not be legal and may be detrimental to the environment. However, we have had feedback on this control point thus far in the consultation, and just a note that we will be revisiting and reviewing this control point as there are signs that it might be a bit too broad and potentially not easily achievable or auditable. So we are reviewing this control point at the moment. Another new control point that we're proposing to add to this section is a control point focused on maintaining equipment appropriately and where needed, calibrating it. This is to help ensure efficiencies and safety concerns are being met with different equipment being used in the business. As historically, this was only required in the plant health or crop health and protection section for plant protection product equipment, but we're proposing that this requirement applies more broadly to other equipment. For example, perhaps you are using irrigation equipment. We do want to draw focus that it's important for this type of equipment as well to be maintained, to ensure there are no leaks, etc., that it's working efficiently. The next control point we'll have a look at is 1.10. So this control point is unique in that it is covering and inclusive of all risk assessments required within the LEAF Marque standard. So what we've done is we've collated all the different risk assessments into one control point, one section for better clarity, and to then support that integrated planning across the rest of the sections of the standard and areas of the business, as planning for these different risks will apply to a lot of different areas of the business, not just one single area, likely. So we'll start with B, 1.10b, which is about conducting a climate risk assessment. This control point was originally in version 16.1, or is in version 16.1, but we have tried to reword it for better clarity. In version 16.1, this control point focused on or used the terminology climate resilience, which can be a bit confusing to really understand what that means. It's a bit broad and can be interpreted in different ways. So we've tried to be more specific and ensure that this control point is really focused on identifying extreme weather events and their potential impact on the business. So this means within the context of this control point, we're really looking for identifying what those potential extreme weather events are locally, thinking about, are there common events that a business might experience every year? Is that potentially heavy rainfall, storms, drought? And then thinking about how they've impacted the business in the past or how they might impact the business. And then thinking about identifying measures that will help the business to endure or withstand those events and potentially reduce the negative impacts. And then thinking about what those highest risk impacts are and focusing on those first to see how those can be mitigated in the first instance. We're also proposing to add a monitoring element. So this is the fourth component of this control point, recording information about these extreme weather events, including the type of event. So what events did the business experience in the last year? What was the severity of the impact? So what was the extent of the impact? Was there physical damage to the site or crops or potentially livestock? Or potentially was the highest impact financial? And thinking about the amount of time that it took to recover from the event. And in practice, this can just be a quick exercise that can potentially help the business reflect on strategies to mitigate these events in the future, thinking about what strategies might have been effective or not as effective during these events. And then if we move on to the other components of this control point, we have moved C into this control point. So the pollution risk assessment, this previously existed in the standard. It is currently in the what's called the pollution and byproduct management section of version 16.1, but we have in version 17 moved it to this section. We also have added a new component to this control point. This is conducting a financial risk assessment. So looking at encouraging businesses to have a look at identifying what economic or financial risks there might be to their business. And then encouraging businesses to review how they might mitigate these risks, although we understand, of course, that that's not always possible. But also thinking about what measures they might be able to take to potentially improve their economic opportunities as well. And just to note, this requirement will not be required for LEAF Mark certification. This has been categorized as an advanced control point, an advanced 1 control point. So it is optional for certification. Another note that this type of information we realize is quite sensitive potentially for businesses. So this is not information or data that Leaf would be collecting. We would not be collecting any financial figures or anything like that. This requirement really just aims to support businesses in thinking about how they can assess those economic or financial risks. And then one more control point to discuss that has had some significant changes made to it in the section is this control point about contractors managing and working with the land in a way that protects and enhances the environment. This control point in version 16.1 is 8.5. If you'd like to compare the two, we also have a comparison of these in our summary of changes document. But this control point has been moved from the landscape and biodiversity section to this business planning and resilience section because it really does apply to the whole farm and the whole business and should be accounted for in all business planning and agreements. And this control point, as you can see in purple, has also been changed to specify that the business has an agreement, a formal agreement to require tenants or contractors to manage the land in a sustainable way. And really the intention of this is to ensure that continuity in the management of the site or land, and that anyone working on the land who might be brought in are aware of the business's aims to reduce negative environmental impacts and enhance the environment where possible. With that, we'll move on to the engaging society section, and then we will wrap up with a question and answer session. So within the engaging society section, we have introduced one new control point, and this control point aims to encourage different forms of engagement related to learning and knowledge sharing, especially potentially peer-to-peer learning, so producer-to-producer knowledge sharing and learning, which really supports relationship building and also sharing experiences and knowledge. This control point focuses on participation in at least one type of knowledge sharing or learning activity each year, whether that's a formal activity that a business attends, like a forum or a research group, webinars, conference talks, and so forth, or it could be informal as well. The idea is that this activity focuses on sustainable food and farming. So the business participates with the aim of learning how to either make their business more sustainable or by sharing their knowledge and experiences with others about sustainable food and farming. We are proposing that this requirement is core, so it would be mandatory for certification. And a final change to note is that we have added 2 control points to this section that were previously in the business planning and resilience section, or in version 16.1, it's called the organization and planning section. We thought that these 2 control points about collaboration and collective action were more fitting within this engaging society section. So they have been moved here. They have also been reworded a bit for better clarity, and there is guidance being added to the guidance column for these control points. So with the collaboration control point, this is focusing on, or I suppose building on the previous control point about knowledge sharing and learning. taking it up a step through collaborative working, where a business might partner with others, either formally or informally, by sharing knowledge and resources to address a sustainability challenge together. And we're proposing this requirement is an advanced 1 category requirement. So this would not be required for certification, but it would be required to achieve the advanced tier of LEAF Mark. And then the collective action control point builds upon the collaboration control point, in that a business is actively working with others to take action towards that collective sustainability goal together. And this control point we're proposing as an advanced 2 control point, so 1 step up from the collaboration control point. And again, this requirement for collective action won't be mandatory for certification. So that is an overview of the key changes to those 2 sections. We do encourage you to go have a look at the version 17 draft, but just to also signpost about what else is happening during this version 17 consultation period and development period. We're currently in our first consultation that will end on the 10th of May. So if you would like to provide more specific or detailed feedback, we encourage you to do that before the 10th of May. You can do that either via a survey, or we will be putting a link in the chat for a very quick feedback form you can complete. It will probably take 1 to 2 minutes, and you can feedback on the changes that we discussed today for these 2 sections. That will probably be the quickest way to feedback. But we also do have longer surveys if you would like to provide additional detail, or you can feel free to email us as well if that is more comfortable. We do have 3 remaining webinars that will be hosted over the next 3 weeks about the soil and substrate management section, plant health and protection, and then waste and byproduct management and water management. And our final webinar will focus on energy and greenhouse gas emissions and landscape and biodiversity. We'll then be wrapping up this consultation in May, incorporating revisions, and then we are planning to go out with another public consultation in July for stakeholders to provide feedback on the updates to the standard. It's then our aim to publish version 17 in January of 2025, which means that version 17 will become effective for auditing in June 2025.